He pointed straight at him in front of the entire boardroom and said, "Coffee. Black. No sugar. That's what you people do best, right?" And just like that, the laughter rippled, not because it was funny, but because no one wanted to be next. The room fell into that heavy, choking silence where complicity and fear shake hands under the table. He didn't know the man he'd just humiliated was about to change everything. He didn't know his own downfall had already begun. All he saw was a black man in a suit. All he assumed was status, low. All he offered was disrespect, loud and public. What he didn't realize was who was watching and what that man was capable of. This isn't just another workplace story. This is what happens when arrogance blinds power and judgment meets justice. Before you find out who he really is and what he does next, pause for a second and ask yourself, what would you have done if you'd been in that room? Comment below where you're watching from and what moment already shocked you. And if you believe that no one deserves to be judged by the color of their skin, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay until the end. Because trust me, you haven't seen the twist yet. At 8:26 a.m. sharp, the 13th floor boardroom of Caperteca's downtown office buzzed with controlled chaos. The quarterly leadership sync was always a tense affair. Executives pacing with coffee in one hand and performance charts in the other, department heads double-checking slides, and junior analysts pretending not to panic as they juggled laptops and jargon-heavy reports. The glass walls reflected a skyline blurred by morning drizzle, casting streaks of gray light across the marble table, where the company's most vocal personalities were beginning to take their seats. Among them, Bradley Scott already commanded the room with the ease of a man who believed the air shifted to accommodate him. Mid-40s, tailored navy suit, custom Italian loafers. He was the archetype of smug entitlement. A senior operations manager with zero self-awareness and an ego twice his quarterly earnings, Bradley leaned against the conference table's edge, cracking jokes with the finance VP and barking last-minute instructions to his assistant. "Make sure the coffee's not that decaf garbage this time," he snapped, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've got investors joining. I want this place sharp, not sleepy." The door to the boardroom eased open then, quietly, unobtrusively, and a man stepped inside. He was tall, mid to late 30s, clean-shaven, wearing a charcoal gray suit with no tie. There was nothing flamboyant about him, no logo-bragging accessories or grand entrance. He carried a leather folio and a stainless steel pen. His eyes were focused, his movements purposeful. But he was black, and in Bradley's eyes, that was all that mattered. Without skipping a beat, Bradley pointed at him with the same casual authority one might use for a janitor walking into the wrong room. "Hey you, new guy, coffee machine's out of pods. Be a team player and top it off, will ya?" Silence fell. Not shock silence, but that dangerous kind of stillness where a room starts testing how far someone's willing to go. The man didn't react with surprise or anger. He paused, then offered a calm response. "My name's Michael Grant," he said simply. "I'm here for the executive review." Bradley laughed, loud and condescending. "Executive review? You sure you're not looking for maintenance? This floor's not for the facilities crew, man. You might be 2 flights too high." A few snickers followed from those who knew better but chose comfort over courage. Others, especially the HR rep sitting near the projector, looked visibly uncomfortable. Michael didn't flinch. Instead, he walked past Bradley, pulled out a chair at the far end of the table, and placed his folio down with precision. He didn't need to argue. His presence said enough. But Bradley wasn't finished. "I mean, come on," he continued, gesturing theatrically to the rest of the room. "No offense, but if you're here to shadow the meeting or clean up afterward, just let us know. We've had enough surprises this quarter." Michael looked up then, meeting Bradley's gaze evenly. "I'm with the Strategic Oversight Committee," he said. "You'll see my name on the review packet under Executive Partnerships." The statement landed like a slow-burning fuse. Bradley opened his mouth, hesitated, then scoffed. "Well, we do encourage community outreach these days, I suppose." No one laughed this time. Eyes turned to laptops, to phones, to anything that wasn't this slow-motion car crash. But Michael didn't rise to it. He opened his folio, clicked his pen, and began reviewing notes as if Bradley no longer existed. That disarmed the room more than any outburst would have. By the time the CEO's assistant stepped in to announce a last-minute delay, the board's travel from San Francisco had been delayed due to weather. Bradley had already dismissed Michael from his attention span, confident that he'd put the new guy in his place. What he didn't know, what no one in that room yet understood, was that Michael wasn't just on the committee. He was the one leading the committee's review of Caprateca's leadership structure. The following Monday morning, the conference room lights flickered awake at exactly 9 a.m., revealing a carefully orchestrated chaos of charts, binders, and caffeinated ambition. It was the first major strategy roundtable since Caprateca's merger with Titan Equity Group, and every department head knew the unspoken stakes. Impress the new committee or risk becoming a line item in next quarter's restructuring memo. Michael Grant arrived early, as he always did, dressed in a charcoal suit with a navy silk tie and a demeanor as composed as a loaded weapon on safety. He took his seat near the center of the table without hesitation, flipping open his portfolio to a hand-labeled tab marked R&D Optimization. No one questioned his place today, not openly at least. Bradley Scott entered 5 minutes late, as if it were a show of dominance. He greeted the room with forced charisma, made a joke about Manic Mondays, and gave Michael a quick glance. Less hostility than last time, but not a shred more respect. The meeting kicked off under the direction of Emma Caldwell, the company's interim COO, and one of the few executives who seemed genuinely invested in results over posturing. "We're bleeding operational hours on multi-stage product rollouts," she said, motioning toward the slide behind her. "The question is, how do we close that gap without compromising innovation or burning out engineering?" As voices around the table began trading generic suggestions, Michael cleared his throat slightly and spoke. "If we realign the early development timeline around predictive deployment triggers," he began, calm and measured, "we can reduce unnecessary QA loops by nearly 20%. The key is shifting engineering validation upstream, not downstream." A few heads turned. It was sharp, actionable, and based on data he'd pulled from 3 merged case studies. Emma raised an eyebrow, clearly interested, but before she could respond, Bradley leaned forward with a smirk. "Interesting," he said, voice dipped in condescension. "But we're not in a TED Talk here. What we need is hard strategy, not feel-good ideas from outside the core process." The pause was deliberate. Everyone in the room heard what he didn't say. Michael didn't flinch. He simply nodded once and jotted something down in his notebook, unbothered. 2 seats down, a younger white associate named Kyle Morgan adjusted his collar and cautiously raised a hand. "Actually," he said, "what if we did move validation upstream? It could streamline pre-release testing if we," he trailed off, clearly realizing mid-sentence that he was rephrasing Michael's idea almost word for word. Bradley's eyes lit up. "Now that is the kind of thinking we need," he declared. "Kyle, I want you to draft that into a 1-page brief by end of day." "Good instincts." The room stiffened. No one said it aloud, but everyone saw it. Same idea, different skin. Michael closed his notebook without a word. Emma glanced at him, then at Bradley, then back to the agenda like someone trying to swallow a mouthful of glass. For the rest of the meeting, Michael contributed only when prompted. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he was already learning how deeply rooted the problem was. After the session, in the hallway outside the conference room, Kyle approached Michael awkwardly. "Hey, I hope that didn't come off like I was stealing your point," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "I just thought it made sense." Michael offered a faint smile. "Don't worry about it," he said calmly. "Just make sure your brief includes upstream QA alignment. Otherwise, they'll be drafting off your version of failure instead." Kyle blinked, nodded slowly, and walked away without another word. By noon, the brief had been submitted. By 3 p.m., Bradley had forwarded it to the CTO with a note that said, "Young Kyle is showing real potential." Michael wasn't copied. Michael Grant arrived each morning on time, his suit pressed, his briefcase neat, and his posture unwavering. Yet each day revealed a new subtle blow to his credibility. After the executive roundtable, where his ideas had been stolen and whitewashed, a strategic planning session was scheduled for Friday. one that would finalize the company's product pivot strategy and place Michael at the helm of a critical subcommittee. His inclusion had been publicly acknowledged by Emma Caldwell herself, who noted, "Michael's insight on systems integration is exactly what we need right now." But come Thursday afternoon, something was off. While most team members received the prep packet, 43 pages of technical roadmaps, financial modeling, and updated risk assessment matrices, Michael found his inbox empty. No file, no brief, no agenda. At first, he thought it was a technical glitch. He checked his spam, reloaded the server, even called IT discreetly. "You're not on the internal recipient list for the Strategy Friday folder," they told him. "Looks like you were left off." Michael thanked them calmly, even though his pulse had begun to tick upward. By then it was after 6:30 p.m., and most of the office had cleared out. He walked past the glass door of Bradley Scott's office and saw it, his name highlighted in red, on a printed version of the strategy brief that sat open on Bradley's desk. Bradley wasn't there, of course. He'd probably left early to celebrate another day of coasting on ego. Michael didn't say anything. He went back to his desk and worked from scratch, pulling archived data, rebuilding the projection models, and staying long into the night piecing together what he could without the missing pages. He slept 4 hours, woke before dawn, and walked into that meeting fully dressed in competence. But when it was his turn to speak, Bradley pounced. "Michael," he said with mock curiosity, "do you have anything prepared, or did you think this was a casual brainstorm?" Murmurs moved across the table like cold wind. Michael straightened in his seat, opened his notes, and began presenting. His analysis was strong, but without access to the official model, it lacked alignment in 3 key areas. Bradley smirked at every discrepancy. "That's why it's important to read the actual briefing, not rely on memory," he said, eyes locked on the others as if to signal a lesson. Emma glanced at Michael but said nothing. The meeting moved on. The next blow came Monday morning, in the form of a Slack message from Bradley. "Hey Michael, you're leading ops handoff for the Wilshire project now. High priority. Deliverables due Friday. Let's impress the C-suite." Michael opened the shared drive for the Wilshire file and saw the original deadline, following Wednesday. "Plenty of time," he responded with a simple, "acknowledged," and started work immediately. But that Wednesday evening, he overheard 2 project managers discussing how Bradley had just updated the master calendar, shifting Wilshire's deadline back by 5 days and marking the final version due this Friday. They hadn't noticed at first, they said. Bradley must have edited the shared access only for certain team members. The conversation wasn't meant for him. But Michael heard it anyway, and it confirmed what he suspected. The deadline shift was intentional. The assignment had been designed not for completion, but for failure. Bradley wanted a reason, one that appeared organic, to discredit him to the executive board. Yet again, Michael said nothing. Instead, he returned to his desk, opened his private drive, and added another entry to the document labeled Obstruction Patterns Bradley S. He worked until midnight again. On Friday morning, the Wilshire handoff was presented. Not only did Michael deliver the full report early, but he also included a risk projection matrix that preemptively addressed every potential blocker, something no one else had even considered. The room was quiet after he finished. Emma looked visibly impressed. "Where'd you pull this data from?" she asked. Michael replied calmly, "I used the older iteration since the updated version wasn't shared with me. I assumed there'd be changes, so I built a flexible model instead." Bradley didn't speak. By the time the end-of-quarter review arrived, Michael Grant had already become a paradox inside Capratech, a man everyone noticed, but few truly understood. Some admired his poise, others envied his composure, but most, especially those like Bradley Scott, resented the quiet efficiency with which he outperformed expectations without seeking credit. The upcoming board presentation was Michael's opportunity to present the Wilshire success directly to the executive committee, including 2 newly appointed partners from Titan Equity, who were known to favor substance over showmanship. It should have been a moment to showcase his results. Instead, it became a theater of sabotage. The morning began with the typical surface-level bustle. Interns adjusting chairs, assistants syncing AV setups, the scent of espresso drifting through the air like nervous perfume. Michael arrived early, as always, wearing a dark blue suit and a subtle tie pin, a simple gesture of respect for the gravity of the meeting. He carried no notes, only a single USB drive containing his entire pitch, structured with precision, backed by data, and rehearsed to the second. At 10:07 a.m., the room filled. C-suite executives trickled in one by one, shaking hands, making jokes, finding their seats. Bradley walked in at 10:11, deliberately late, flashing his polished smile and tossing off aloud, "Morning, folks. Hope someone brought donuts, because this strategy talk's gonna need sugar." Laughter echoed from the less secure. He made his way to the tech setup and casually whispered something to the intern managing the soundboard. No one noticed. Not yet. Michael was introduced next, and he stepped to the podium with a quiet nod. His voice came through clearly at first, steady, deliberate, confident. "Good morning. What we're about to walk through is not just a successful case study. It's a blueprint for scalable, agile expansion. Wilshire wasn't just a project. It was a test of infrastructure, culture, and leadership." But 20 seconds in, the mic hissed. Then it popped. Then the volume jumped, loud and distorted, amplifying Michael's voice into a warped echo. The board shifted uncomfortably. Someone covered one ear. A few frowned. Bradley leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking. "Sorry, folks," he said loudly, cutting through the moment. "Must be a recognition issue. These cheap systems sometimes struggle with, strong accents." The room froze. No one laughed. No one had to. The implication was already acid in the air. Michael paused, his mouth a line of steel. The AV tech flushed red and adjusted the levels quickly, but before Michael could continue, Bradley stood up. "Actually," he said, raising his voice just enough to dominate, "before we dive too deep, can we clarify something? Who authorized this presentation? I thought we had Kyle slated to speak on Wilshire." A murmur spread. Emma looked up from her notes, startled. "Michael was the lead. Kyle assisted," she said. "That was confirmed in last week's alignment call." Bradley shrugged dramatically. "I must have missed the memo. It's just, well, if we're going to take up valuable boardroom time, we should be sure we're hearing from the most qualified voice in the room, not just the most visible." The jab landed like a slap. Michael took a single step back from the podium, then forward again. "If there's an issue with my presence here, Mr. Scott," he said evenly, "I'd prefer you state it clearly." Bradley smiled like a man who thought he still controlled the floor. "Oh, don't play the victim card. You should be grateful you even got the floor." Emma stood, but before she could speak, Michael did. "Gratitude is earned through respect, not tolerance," he said quietly, his voice now perfectly level, the mic finally balanced. "And for the record, I didn't take the floor. I built it." A beat of silence hung in the air. One of the Titan partners, a sharp-eyed woman named Sandra Liu, glanced down at her tablet, then up at Bradley. "Mr. Grant," she said, "please proceed." The air cracked slightly as controls shifted. But the damage had been done. Bradley had made his move public. What he didn't realize was that by doing so, he'd drawn attention not just to his prejudice, but to the pattern. Michael didn't finish the full presentation that morning, not because he failed, but because halfway through, the board asked for the full Wilshire dossier to be emailed directly to them, privately, away from interruptions. Michael stepped aside without fanfare, returned to his seat, and took a long breath. The meeting with Sandra Liu from Titan Equity had confirmed what he suspected. There were people at the top who were finally starting to question the dysfunction within the company's management chain, and more importantly, who was feeding it. Yet, even as the tide began to shift subtly in his favor, the undercurrent of institutional resistance pulled harder than ever. At 10 a.m., Michael was summoned to a closed-door meeting with Regional Director Warren Nolan, a man known for his country club charisma and a 30-year friendship with Bradley Scott. Nolan had a reputation for being smooth, but those who paid attention knew he only smiled when power was watching. His office overlooked the downtown skyline, a panoramic view that seemed almost designed to remind others where he stood, literally and politically. As Michael entered, Nolan didn't rise. Instead, he gestured lazily to the chair across from him, his silver cufflinks catching the morning light. "Michael," he said, his voice dipped in a kind of condescension that masqueraded as mentorship, "I wanted to talk to you about yesterday's little situation." Michael remained silent, posture upright, eyes steady. Nolan leaned back in his chair. "Look, I reviewed the presentation. Solid work. But here's the thing. This team runs on cohesion. Culture fit. You're a smart guy, no doubt. But some of your style choices might be coming off as, well, a bit disruptive." Michael blinked slowly. "Disruptive how?" Nolan smiled, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "You push too hard, too fast. You challenge without warming the room. That kind of energy. It doesn't always land well with the old guard. Maybe it's time to consider adjusting, blending in more. Think of it as an investment in long-term success." Michael didn't reply right away. He simply looked at Nolan and let the silence do the work. After a pause, he said, "I see. So the issue isn't the system. It's how I react to it." Nolan chuckled, unbothered. "You catch on quick." The conversation ended without resolution, and Michael walked out with the clarity of someone who had just been given permission to stop pretending the system was fair. By the end of that week, things escalated. An anonymous email began circulating through internal channels. It wasn't sent to Michael directly, but by mid-afternoon, a junior developer had nervously forwarded it to him with the subject line, "Thought you should see this." The message, dressed up as an employee's concern about meritocracy, was a thinly veiled attack. It questioned why someone like Michael, who hadn't even been with the company a full year, was suddenly at the center of so many high-level projects. It mentioned DI quotas and performative promotions, and closed with a warning that Caperteca's culture was being diluted by overcorrection. The email was unsigned, untraceable, but its tone was unmistakably familiar. Michael read it once, then again, not because he was shocked, but because he needed to see it clearly for what it was. The moment the mask slipped, the tone, the language, the dog whistles, it reeked of Bradley. But more importantly, it hinted at silent supporters. People like Nolan. People who smiled during strategy meetings, but whispered afterward. That evening, Michael compiled a report, his own version of the truth. He included a chronological breakdown of missed communications, altered deadlines, microaggressions, and targeted exclusions. He attached screenshots, email timestamps, project files. He included a summary of yesterday's boardroom incident, along with a transcript of his meeting with Nolan, recorded legally on a company-issued phone. He labeled the file Internal Culture Audit Level Red and uploaded it directly to Titan Equity's oversight server. No emotion, just facts, pure structure. The following morning, Titan's legal team confirmed receipt. No acknowledgement came from Caperteca's internal HR. Predictably, that same day, Michael noticed something else. Several colleagues, ones who had previously been friendly, now avoided eye contact. The Monday after the anonymous email circulated, Michael Grant sat alone in the 15th floor lounge, a place typically reserved for visiting executives and high-tier clients. The space was quiet, clinical, dressed in muted tones of cream and brushed steel, with floor-to-ceiling windows that stretched across the downtown skyline like a glass curtain between ambition and reality. He wasn't supposed to be there, at least not according to unspoken company norms, but his badge still worked, and at this point he had stopped asking for permission in a place that rarely gave it. On his screen was a request draft, simple and direct, addressed to Meredith Voss, Caperteca's elusive CEO. He had never met her, few had, but he had studied every leadership memo she'd issued, every acquisition she'd approved, every sentence she'd published. And there was something about her language that felt deliberate, precise, almost mathematical. She was sharp, no doubt, strategic, but Michael needed to know if she was also honest. He pressed send. The request wasn't inflammatory. It simply asked for 15 minutes to discuss concerns about cultural breakdowns, leadership conduct, and systemic inefficiencies. He included his credentials, attached key documents from the internal audit, and left his contact information. 3 hours later, a reply came, not from her, but from her executive assistant. It was short, cold, final. MS. Voss does not take unsolicited meetings. Please direct any future communication to your reporting line. That was it. No reference to the audit. No mention of the file. No curiosity. No accountability. Just a locked door. And Michael understood instantly. If change was coming, it wouldn't come from within. It would have to be forced in. 2 days later, during a metrics review in the operations war room, a sterile glass box overlooking the internal project floor, Michael was once again asked to present. The agenda had been hastily thrown together by Bradley, of course, who somehow always managed to center meetings around himself while avoiding actual work. This time, Michael came prepared with a lean but surgically precise set of insights. Performance deltas between field teams, integration timelines for the post-merger toolsets, and most damningly, inefficiency data that pointed directly to legacy workflows championed by Bradley himself. The charts were clean, color-coded, and airtight. He barely finished speaking before the interruption came. "Wow," Bradley said, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed with theatrical amusement. "Very impressive. Did you borrow this from someone smarter, or did ChatGPT write it for you?" A few people chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or flee. Michael looked at him, expression unchanging. "These numbers are pulled from Caperteca's own internal dashboards," he said evenly. "All validated and time-stamped." Bradley smirked. "Sure, but context matters, right? You can cherry-pick anything to sound good, especially if you're trying to make a name for yourself." Emma Caldwell stiffened in her chair. Kyle Morgan shifted uncomfortably. Even the senior engineer sitting by the AV screen glanced sideways, sensing that something was off. But no one said anything. Michael didn't push. He closed his laptop slowly and leaned back, giving the room permission to be complicit in silence. "If there are no further questions," he said, voice calm as glass, "I'll let the data speak for itself." No one objected. The meeting ended in awkward quiet. Outside the glass room, as people began to shuffle toward elevators or whisper in corners, Michael remained seated. He stared out the window at the city, at the cranes building towers from dust, at the illusion of progress so many in that building clung to. The walls of Capertec, once arrogant in their silence, now seemed to hum with quiet uncertainty. Meetings ran shorter, HR started documenting more thoroughly, and Bradley, though still smug in public, had begun to show signs of unease. His jokes fell flatter. His outbursts came quicker. And most telling of all, he started asking questions about future changes in leadership with the nervous curiosity of a man who sensed the ice thinning beneath him. Then came the company-wide email, mandatory all-hands meeting Friday 9 a.m., executive auditorium. Attendance required. No agenda. No explanation. Just a location and a time. By Thursday afternoon, rumors were already flying. Some said the company was restructuring again. Others guessed another merger, or worse, a round of layoffs. Bradley, meanwhile, made a show of feigning disinterest. But he couldn't resist holding court in the break room. "Probably just another diversity campaign announcement," he said, sipping his third espresso. "God forbid we go a quarter without checking a box." A few laughed, others shifted uncomfortably, but no one contradicted him. Friday morning arrived like a loaded gun. The auditorium buzzed with anxious energy as over 200 employees filled the seats. Executives sat near the front, middle managers lined the aisles, and Michael entered quietly, taking a seat in the back row alone. No one greeted him. No one noticed, which was exactly the way he wanted it. At 9:02, the lights dimmed. A spotlight snapped to life on the stage. Emma Caldwell walked to the podium, flanked by two unfamiliar individuals in dark suits, Titan Equity representatives. Clearly, she cleared her throat and spoke without ceremony. "Good morning. Thank you for being here. Today's announcement marks a pivotal change in Caperteca's future." The room stilled. Emma continued, As you know, Titan Equity Group has been conducting a comprehensive internal evaluation. Based on those findings, we are announcing new leadership to guide this company into its next phase of ethical, sustainable, and accountable growth. Bradley leaned forward in his seat, his expression suddenly taut, as if expecting his own name to be called. Emma glanced down at her card, then looked back up. Please join me in welcoming the new Regional Executive Director for North America, Mr. Michael Grant. For a beat, no one moved. It was as if the name had been spoken in a foreign language, incomprehensible to those who had chosen not to learn it. Then Michael stood, calm, poised. The room turned toward him in stunned silence as he made his way to the stage. Emma stepped aside. One of the Titan representatives shook his hand, and then Michael took the mic. His voice was clear, steady, absolutely in control. Thank you, Emma. And thank you, Titan, for entrusting me with this responsibility. He paused, scanning the crowd. His eyes didn't search for support. They searched for memory, and they found it in every face that had once looked through him. This is a company with potential, he continued. But potential means nothing if it isn't honest about its culture, its flaws, and the way it treats people who don't fit a certain mold. Near the front, Bradley sat frozen, his face drained of color, his mouth slightly ajar. I've spent the last few months listening, Michael said, not just to what was said in meetings, but what was said when people thought I had no voice. That perspective has been illuminating. A ripple moved through the crowd. Michael smiled. So let me be clear, this isn't just a promotion. It's a redirection, one that starts with truth. Doors opened when he passed. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Eyes turned quickly away, as if afraid they might meet something honest. He wore no arrogance, no vindictive smirk, just the quiet certainty of someone who had been underestimated long enough and no longer needed to explain himself. At 10 a.m. sharp, Michael convened his first closed-door meeting with department leads, HR executives, and Titan Equity observers. The conference room, designed for glossy presentations and hollow congratulations, now served as a war room. No croissants, no catered coffee, just water, legal pads, and accountability. Michael didn't waste time. He opened with a slide that read in simple bold font, Culture Reset, Phase 1. Then he spoke. We are no longer protecting systems that reward mediocrity and punish integrity. Effective today, we will begin a full-scale review of all management practices, promotion paths, and disciplinary records over the last 36 months. Any individual with substantiated patterns of discrimination, retaliation, or misconduct, regardless of tenure, will be reviewed for immediate restructuring or removal. The silence was thunderous. Bradley sat at the far end of the table, pale but postured, clenching a pen so tightly it looked ready to snap. Michael didn't look at him. He didn't need to. Instead, he gestured to Emma Caldwell, who stood and distributed sealed packets to everyone in the room. These, she said, contain anonymized summaries of all internal complaints from the past 3 years, categorized by department and complaint type. For transparency, all identifiers have been removed except when patterns clearly point to recurring actors. Pages turned. Brows furrowed. Someone muttered under their breath. And then it happened. Someone read out loud, almost involuntarily, Scott B. cited in 7 separate grievances involving race-based microaggressions, selective deadline manipulation, and exclusion from promotion opportunities. Heads turned. Bradley shifted in his seat. This is absurd, he snapped. Anonymous reports? Anyone can write whatever they want. It's hearsay. Michael responded without looking up. It's hearsay when it's once. It's a pattern when it's 7 times. Emma added. And the accompanying documentation includes corroborating time-stamped communications and Slack records. We've already had outside counsel verify legitimacy. Bradley stood now, chest puffed, voice strained. So what? This is a purge. I've been with this company longer than half the people in this room. Michael finally met his gaze, not with anger, but with precision. And that tenure will be respected in your exit interview if the findings stand. But you won't weaponize loyalty as a shield from accountability. The room was still. For once, no one came to Bradley's defense. Not even Nolan, whose chair remained conspicuously empty. Word was, he'd taken emergency leave Friday afternoon. The meeting continued with Emma outlining the new three-phase plan: internal ethics hotline expansion, mandatory management training, and rotational oversight teams drawn from cross-departmental units to prevent insular toxicity. By the end of the hour, the message was clear. Caperteca's new era wouldn't just sound different, it would be different. After the meeting, Michael returned to his office and closed the door behind him. He looked out across the city skyline, the same one he'd stared at weeks ago as an outsider inside the machine. Now, he was reprogramming it from within. Michael Grant arrived at 8 a.m., sharp as always, but this time the reception desk didn't look through him. The staff stood when he passed. HR representatives waited in his office, their folders thick with evidence and procedure. At 9:13 a.m., Bradley Scott was summoned to Conference Room 4, where Titan's Regional Compliance Officer and Emma Caldwell were already seated. It was a short meeting. No raised voices, no final monologue, just documents presented, findings acknowledged, and a single signature required at the bottom of a form titled Notice of Indefinite Suspension Pending Termination Review. Bradley signed without ceremony. When he emerged, he didn't shout. He didn't slam a door. He simply walked past his former subordinates, face pale and jaw clenched, like a man who had finally heard the verdict he'd long pretended wouldn't come. His badge deactivated before he reached the elevator. That same day, Michael quietly issued an email titled Invitation to return Capertec Equity Initiative. It went out to 7 former employees, high-performing talents, who had resigned in the past 2 years under suspiciously similar circumstances. One pushed out of a lead design role after filing a complaint, another denied promotion after outperforming her peers, several more dismissed under vague performance reviews despite flawless metrics. One by one, they replied, some cautiously, others with gratitude. All of them said yes. But the most impactful moment came Friday morning, when Michael scheduled an all-staff forum titled Voices That Were Never Heard. The invite list excluded C-suite executives, directors, and senior managers. Only frontline staff, interns, analysts, and junior employees were allowed to speak. Michael reserved the largest auditorium, removed all name tags, silenced the executive seating row, and turned off all cameras. Then he stood on the stage and said only this: I'm not here to lead this meeting. You are. The mic was passed freely. What followed was 3 hours of raw, unfiltered testimony. Stories of favoritism, of harassment brushed aside, of brilliant ideas dismissed until echoed by someone paler or louder. One young data engineer spoke with shaking hands about how she cried in her car every day for 3 weeks after being told by a senior VP that she didn't look like a tech lead. Another recounted how his manager praised his project, then gave credit to someone else on the final report. Laughter, tears, long silences. Michael sat in the front row, silent, taking notes. And behind him, by his order, the entire executive team sat as silent observers, stripped of authority, forbidden to interrupt, justify, or explain. Bradley wasn't there, of course. His badge didn't scan anymore, but his legacy was. And so were those who had enabled it. When the forum ended, Michael didn't close with a speech. He simply stood, nodded to the room, and left. The next morning, new changes rolled out. A reverse mentorship program where senior leaders would shadow junior employees for 30 days. Anonymous voting added to internal promotion reviews. The creation of a new ethics liaison office, staffed independently from HR, with the authority to audit executive behavior without internal approval. Meanwhile, Titan Equity issued a formal statement to shareholders. Caperteca's restructuring has begun with integrity. This is not a rebranding. This is a reformation. By the end of the week, the story had leaked to 2 national business outlets. One ran the headline, Black Executive Turns Toxic Tech Culture into Blueprint for Equity. Another simply said, he was the joke in the boardroom, now he runs it. And Michael Grant? He stayed out of the interviews. The weeks that followed brought an unfamiliar kind of quiet to Capratech, a quiet that didn't signal fear or tension, but reflection. For the first time in years, people moved through the halls without glancing over their shoulders. Conversations became candid. Ideas flowed without being filtered through politics or pedigree. Under Michael Grant's leadership, transparency wasn't just a buzzword, it was a requirement. Yet even in the wake of sweeping reform and restored morale, there remained one name that no one spoke openly: Bradley Scott. His suspension had created a vacuum, but not a void. His absence wasn't mourned, yet something unresolved lingered in the space he had once occupied, like a shadow that refused to fade completely. Then, 3 months after his exit, it happened. An email appeared in the company-wide inbox. The subject line read, "To those I silenced." It was signed simply Bradley. The message wasn't long, but it was clear. He wrote that he had taken the past 90 days to listen, to people he once dismissed, to systems he once abused, and to truths he once refused to face. He admitted he had led through fear, used power like a weapon, and made decisions not to build, but to protect his ego. He named his mistakes. He didn't excuse them. And, at the end, he asked only for a chance to learn. Michael read the message alone in his office that morning, the city quiet behind the window pane, his coffee cooling beside him. He didn't respond right away. He didn't need to. The answer had already been in motion. That afternoon, he stepped onto the 11th floor where the newly formed Leadership Renewal Program was being piloted. Internally, it was known as Second Chance Leadership, a bold, controversial initiative designed to rehabilitate managers with disciplinary records who showed genuine intent to change. Not everyone agreed with it. Some thought it too generous. Others thought it naive. But Michael believed in redemption, not as an obligation, but as a conscious, earned process. And Bradley Scott was the program's first applicant. When he walked into the orientation room a week later, he didn't look like the man who had once sneered across boardroom tables. His posture was less rigid, his voice quieter, his presence almost uncertain. He sat in the front row with a blank notepad, flanked by 2 other former managers with stories of their own. No special treatment, no former titles, just people learning to lead again. The program didn't teach spreadsheets or KPIs. It taught listening, empathy, accountability. It brought in former victims as speakers, hosted conflict simulations, and even required participants to mentor interns from underrepresented backgrounds. The goal wasn't to erase the past. It was to confront it, understand it, and make sure it wasn't repeated. Weeks passed. One afternoon, during a session on restorative leadership, Bradley approached Michael during a break. He didn't come with excuses or platitudes. He came with a simple question. Do you believe a person can become something they never were if they truly work for it? Michael studied him for a long second before answering. Not if they're trying to become someone else, he said, but if they're trying to become better, yes. That night, Bradley stayed late to finish an exercise on rebuilding trust. And when he submitted his first mentorship report 3 weeks later, it was handwritten, detailed, and signed at the bottom. Formerly Bradley the manager, now Bradley the student. Meanwhile, Capratech's story began spreading across the industry, not as a scandal, but as a case study. Other companies called. Universities invited Michael to speak, but he declined most of them. He knew this work wasn't about public recognition. It was about private courage, the kind that took place not in headlines, but in choices made when no one was watching. On the 1-year anniversary of his appointment, Michael stood before the company, not as the hero of a comeback story, but as a builder of something new. He spoke little. Instead, he invited 3 junior employees to speak about the changes they had seen, the promotions they had earned, the culture they now believed in. And as applause filled the room, Michael smiled, not because he had won, but because they had all stopped losing. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe to support more powerful narratives like this one. Where in the world are you watching from? And which moment in the story struck you the hardest? Was it the reveal in the boardroom, the anonymous email, or Bradley's final transformation? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.